Welcome back! I'm Mel Mitchell-Jackson, and I am an adventure artist. And today, I'm going to be talking more about something I'm overcoming in my studio: how life gets in the way of art. I'll share some of my strategies on how I fight back to help you do the same, and at the end, we're going to spend some creative time together. I've truly been looking forward to this month after a busy summer, but life got in the way of my plans. As artists, this is such a common struggle we all have. A plan, a schedule, a list of goals or commitments to ourselves and our practice. But no matter how hard we try, sometimes life's circumstances strike all of that down and require us to change. I was planning to spend the month of September working on painting new work from recent hikes for holiday print runs, starting commissions, but instead I had to close my shop and avoid applying to more markets this winter. My studio got absolutely torn apart dealing with some unexpected housing instability, and I'm prepared now to essentially move or partially relocate at a moment's notice. This took so much work and caused so much anxiety. I'm a renter, which means when things happen, I'm usually going to be the last to know and the first to go. Our homes are core sources of stability and clarity. Whether you're an artist or not, if you're a fellow renter, you know that a lease is something that is temporary. It's not something that we can count on indefinitely. As artists, if our homes are where we work, they need to feel secure and relaxing. They need to be sanctuaries that allow us to simply show up to our creativity. The situation that I found myself in led me to doom scroll on Craigslist and Zillow for apartments for hours on end. My screen time went from an hour and a half a day to 7 hours a day, and I was just looking for anything to escape this uncertainty I found myself in. I lost what felt like my ability to simply show up in here and make work. I wasn't honoring my desire to be persistently blooming. I was so distracted by the uncertainty I was facing that I couldn't focus. I was stagnating in my anxiety around potentially having to move. Some people call experiences like this art block, and I have definitely run into that more than once. It feels really demoralizing to be in this blocked state. You find yourself questioning everything, and that just makes the anxiety balloon. As we talk strategies, feel free to grab your favorite beverage, tea, start that thing you wanted to do with a human body doubling alongside you, and let's get into it. My first impulse, anytime I find myself struggling like this, is to get outside in nature, to change my vantage, and to listen to the song of birds and the rustling of leaves. It doesn't need to be a long hike or anything super strenuous. It can simply be walking to the park near home and calling an old friend. The simple act of getting outside is free, and it's one of our best resources against the doom scrolling and distractions that are ever present in our daily life. Even in the winter, when I was living in the Midwest, just getting out to look at the snow or driving with my partner to a frozen lake helped me navigate the boring sameness of all the days blending together. When I get outside, I see nature experiencing change all around me, from peeling bark to decomposing leaves, to fruit and seeds ready to inspire new growth. Being creative requires change. While you might be a creative person like me, who really thrives with goals, habits, and systems that keep everything mostly the same, sometimes knowing when to abandon them is more important than trying to force yourself to stay inside and stick to it. I have a tendency to be a homebody. I often call myself an indoor cat. I am also an artist that has a really hard time taking breaks and caring for myself. It wouldn't be honest of me to not admit that I'm a person with a quilt of neurodivergent diagnoses, but it's probably just one of the things that drew me to making art in the first place. Building breaks in your day can be really helpful. I've started using the Pomodoro method while I'm working to focus, which sounds fancy, but it's simply setting a 30-minute timer and then taking a 5-minute time break after every work session. A big thing that helped me is switching mediums. Watercolor to oil paint, digital to physical, sometimes even switching from paint altogether to colored pencil. I choose to share my artwork and process openly online, but for some other mediums, I don't, and that's with intention. I have other creative hobbies that I don't share. When I make time for it, I like to play music, cook elaborate meals for my friends and family, and play creative games like The Sims. Those private creative practices are also what keeps me from stagnating. Simply switching gears to a different process is sometimes all my brain needs in order to discover a new way of doing something. Sometimes these medium switches help remind me of why I get inspired. Another thing that helps is something that I learned from my partner: having lunch at the same time or near the same time every day. Even if I'm working on a contract or teaching a class, having a hard stop or a break is crucial to feeling like I can continue to give to the projects I'm working on. It helps my mind refresh the things that are happening. And as much as I have that tendency to hyperfocus and get glued into the project and just not stop and power through, it's a whole lot easier for me to stay creative longer, and it's more sustainable in the long run if I'm taking breaks and making sure I'm eating things that make me feel good and take that time for actual adequate rest. One of my favorite ways to rest is active rest, and I do that by getting outside, and I like to wander. When I return to the studio, I'm not just refreshed, I'm excited. And it's what usually allows me to do things like experiment with and push color in new ways. I can see differently, and I can lean into my desire to oversaturate or exaggerate certain tones. It's why going on hikes for reference and then coming back to paint as soon as possible is so essential. Those private creative practices are also what keeps me from stagnating. Simply switching gears to a different process is sometimes all I need in order to discover a new way of doing something. Sometimes these medium switches will help remind me of why I get inspired. Keeping some of these practices private and acknowledging them as hobbies is a really intentional choice. There's so much pressure as a creative person to try and make their living online to monetize everything. I can assure you though, if I applied similar pressure to my other creative practices, I might want to avoid them too. This is my way of telling you that if you have a creative hobby that brings you joy, it's okay to make it a private yet important part of your life. How you use another material will influence how you work with your main form of creativity. They may find ways to feed into and support one another, but they don't always have to. Whatever you do, don't listen to advice from people telling you to abandon parts of yourself that aren't profitable. For that way of thinking isn't helpful, and I have found that it builds a lot of resentment. Especially the resentment I see from folks who went to art school or who are trying to make things work now on Instagram after it seems the algorithm changes are really not benefiting artists like they used to. Staring at metrics or things like that for hours on end can make you feel itchy. And remember, listening to other people's advice, it's always going to be filtered through their values and their worldview. They may not want the same type of life that you want. They may not want the same things that you want. And it's okay to take some things that somebody gives to you or says to you and leave the rest. You don't have to follow everything to the letter. Another thing that I like to do when life gets in the way of my art is to investigate my beliefs. Because sometimes it's not necessarily life that's getting in the way, it's my mindset. Ask yourself questions like, why do I feel a certain way or have a specific idea that something is going to happen? Why do I want to do this certain thing? Is it because someone else told me I should? If I want to make this, do I have to do it in this way? There can be a distinction that you draw in your life between the work that you do that is viable for your livelihood and the things that bring you a sense of healing, joy, or serenity. These are hard times, and it's easy to get caught up in the minutia of everyday life. We are always looking for a solution. And I think for me, especially when I was working in retail, I was always looking for a way out or a way to move on to the next thing and not be stuck where I was sitting. So I totally get that. But a big thing that can happen is that we can get stuck in ruts or habits or things that are unhealthy. You know, not all habits are focused on our productivity and our wellness. I feel like a lot of habits sometimes are things that are unconscious. The author, David Foster Wallace, gave a commencement speech in 2005 to Kenyon College that was later published as a book, this book right here, This is Water. And I can't recommend reading it enough, especially if you've been resonating with the things I've said so far in this video, or the things that I've discussed about unlearning art school. He goes into talking about how our Western education has encouraged us to overthink, to over-intellectualize, and to not pay attention to the present moment. All big things that I'm still actively working on, and it's important to remember that we are all in progress. So my favorite part about that book was this concept that Foster Wallace called the natural default setting. As humans, we have lots of things that we become accustomed to or ingrained with us as our default, meaning we're not going to question them. They just happen to us. They are habits, beliefs, actions, or self-talk that happens without us consciously considering them. And this is one of the biggest ways that life gets in the way of our art. I think it's easy for us to have experiences where some trusted adult or some person in our life will tell us one way of doing things, and we think that we always have to do it that way. We're not willing to try a different path. About midway through the year, I realized that I had taken on way too much in my art business, as many new small business owners do. I was saying yes to everything and putting my well-being at risk by doing it. My partner was always asking me, "Hey, are you finished working?" And the response would almost always be no. Workaholism is something that I have really struggled with my entire life, and I definitely was someone who back in the early 2010s was following the girl boss, hustle culture, lean in mentalities that ended up making me really sick and really ill, and I don't want to do those things anymore. So I started investigating why I was doing that. So what I did is I investigated why I was saying yes to everything and why I was working so much. And it came down to default mode. I was saying yes to everything that came my way out of necessity for survival rather than asking questions like, is this aligned with my values? Or do I have enough energy to say yes to this? Or is doing this thing with everything else I have already committed to physically, mentally, or emotionally actually possible? Giving ourselves the space and grace to question our natural default setting can really help. It's taught me that I don't really like alcohol and would like to avoid it in my life. Despite the fact that at art openings and in the arts community, alcohol was just a part of entry, and I actually think that's not a really good thing. Investigating the natural default setting has also taught me that I have a tendency to neglect habits that focus on caring for my body. Questioning the default mode has made me reconsider habits around shopping that I formed after working in retail for over a decade. It has taught me that I'm allowed to change my mind. I'm allowed to say no, and I can still, while saying no, stay compassionate to others as I grow and change alongside them. Being okay with making mistakes and not being perfect is really hard. I'm working on it with you. The final thing I have been doing to deal with life getting in the way of my art is taking things apart. In preparing to move, I have gone through every cabinet, every box, every nook, and every drawer of my home. The Goblin home organization method of out of sight, out of mind surely caught up to me big time. I spent over a week deep cleaning, reorganizing, and being really frank with myself about what matters and what doesn't. I've been asking big questions around what would it look like to massively downsize, or could I sensibly do without some of the things that I used to think were essential, like all of my books on art theory. Instability forces you out of the default mode and forces you to look at all the cobwebs and compulsions to cling to things that are not truly serving you. In 2020, I moved across the country twice for work at my former tech job, and then back from Missouri to California a third time for a different role in 2021. So I'm pretty good at moving and pretty good at knowing what things I don't need to carry with me to the next place. Everything felt a little temporary during the beginning of the pandemic because things felt so dire and mysterious. But moving into this space that I've lived in since 2021 felt like my first real experience of home and nesting. This is where I was living when I married my partner. It's the place where I took this big leap to start teaching independently and focus on my art full time. I mentioned in another video that I was really close with my grandma, who was a painter, and the last conversation I had with her while she was alive was in this house. Regardless of whatever comes next, I have really big gratitude for this space. Taking things apart does not have to mean that you are preparing to move or going through all of your belongings, but as winter approaches and our closets get cozier, you might be inspired to do a little bit of this. Some other ways I recommend taking things apart is to analyze how something is made. It's one of my favorite activities, whether that is taking apart a painting you love or trying to dissect the ingredients for your favorite sauce from your go-to takeout spot. Allowing the analytical and systems-focused part of your brain to dissect something can be really gratifying. It's why I love regularly making color charts. They are my favorite thing ever. It's a long-standing practice that helps me better understand and discern color relationships in the world around me. If you're a musician, another version of this is to cover your new favorite song in the most indulgent way possible, or analyze the sound of a particular sound that your favorite musician is using, or just to sit there and nerd out about chord structure in any way that makes you excited. Because persistently showing up for your creative practice in any way that works for you can be just for you. This big concept of art block or getting stuck is going to be a core focus of my sketchbook club over on my Discord server for the next few months. It's a bi-weekly informal hangout on my very free Discord server. So if this resonated with you, you should come join us and find that stubborn time to make together. Even with everything that I have going on, I have so much gratitude for my ability to carve out time to still do some things that are values aligned. I'm teaching a few courses in person, I'm leading private creative retreats, and I'm working on a DIY creative retreat workbook that all of my paid Substack supporters will be able to test out once version 1.0 is ready for feedback. If any of that resonates, or you want to connect with me more in this slow and deliberate way, check out the links in the description. This is my time to tell you that one of the best ways you can support this channel is to share this video with someone in your life that you know might benefit from it. You can also subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment down below, or join one of my free communities. I have a free Discord server, link in the description, and a Substack. Both of them are free. Over on Substack, though, you can choose to pay and support my practice. In exchange, you'll get exclusive perks like Notion templates, prompts for your creative practice, and you'll get early access to all of the things I'm releasing. So far, this whole video has been about art block and the ways that I deal with it. And I know that a lot of you watching also struggle with art block too. So if you have the space for it, I would encourage you to go ahead and grab that creative project you've been avoiding, whether you want to practice your scales on guitar, finish a sleeve you've been knitting on a sweater, try out that embroidery kit you got from your friend as a gift, doodle, color, play in your sketchbook, make a collage, or get out polymer clay. I'm 100% serious about that. Like, go ahead and pause the video and go grab that stuff and let's make together. All right, great. So we're making together. So one of my favorite things that I used to love about having a studio with other people was being able to work in a slightly different room, but carry on a conversation with a fellow artist making. So imagine that we're now studio mates. And the thing that I'm working on is a painting of a madrone tree. It's what I've been working on since the very beginning of this video. And this was inspired by the hike that you saw in the hiking footage. So I went to San Pedro Park in Pacifica and went searching for some madrone trees. And at first I thought I wasn't going to see anything because it was mostly just eucalyptus and all of the native chaparral, but we saw quite a few madrones once we got into slightly higher elevation. These are a tree that is native to the Pacific Northwest and Northern California, and it has these really beautiful evergreen leaves that I have started describing the shape of as blumpy. It also has bark that is bright red in some places, burgundy in others, peeling and gold in others. And then near the base of the trees, it usually has a very gray, almost oak-like texture to the bark. So having one tree with so many different variations on it is really, really cool to see. I've been having a lot of fun playing with color and experimenting when painting these madrones. I'm working with some bright neons in order to make the red really glow. So making that pink underpainting that you saw before, where I outlined the entire tree in that bright fluorescent pink. I'm using a pink paint from a brand called Case for Making, and they make a really awesome, super pigmented fluorescent pink watercolor. I'm using that here. And I also am doing almost this entire painting using one brush. I have a tendency that I've always had to pretty much exclusively use angle shaders for all of what I paint. I find them so awesome. They kind of work like filberts, those round shaped brushes, if you're familiar with them, and they hold a lot of paint, but you can get such a wide variety of marks. You can get a more square shaped mark, or you can paint with just the tip of the brush, and you can get those really nice little leaf shapes that I'm making. So here I am mixing up a much darker purple for some of the areas that are really in shadow on the tree. Now this is a madrone that we saw near the highest overlook on the loop hike that we did. And what's really cool is it's looking out directly at the ocean. So that little peak of water you see is the Pacific Ocean, and that tiny little purple mountain is Mount Tam in Marin. If you're familiar with the Bay Area, it's really cool to see directly across the bay and know how far you are from something just by the vantage you get on your hike. This entire sketchbook is almost done, and it's been a huge blast to spend so much time over the past year just working on the landscapes of California in it. I bought this sketchbook as sort of a leap gift for myself. So I was reading The Artist's Way when I left my old tech job, and I told myself that this would be my leap gift because Julia Cameron in The Artist's Way has this great quote that says, "Leap and the net will appear." And while in hindsight that sounds a little bit delusional, but Delulu is the true Lulu, right? I definitely wanted to have some faith in myself and some good positive belief in myself that I could make this work, and it seems to be working. I'm having so much fun painting and playing when I make the time for it. And then I'm going back through here with some buff titanium gouache that I added a little bit of yellow to, and I'm kind of mixing that in for those more yellowy golden parts of the madrone bark that likes to peek its head through. Hopefully this helped you shake off some of the art block that you've been feeling, and hopefully you feel inspired by the things I shared in this video and this tiny bit of time that we took together. Wow, amazing! You watched all the way to the end. I hope that you made something with me and that you keep going. Queue up another video like this one here, and I hope that if you were working on a thing that wasn't creative, you're closer to completion than you were before. Try to be compassionate with yourself as you deal with these big things and fight back to stay creative and persistently bloom. See ya!